Hello, welcome to Old Testament archaeology or archaeology of the ancient Near East. This PowerPoint is about archaeology and what archaeology is. When we take a look at this satellite image, we can see Egypt to the left, and we can see Israel. This is the land of the Bible, including the Mediterranean and much beyond. But as we come to the idea of what archaeology is, the person that most people think of is Indiana Jones. And so I've called him the patron saint of archaeologists, because he's done a lot to promote archaeology, at least the idea of it. What he does is really not what archaeologists do, but he's gotten a lot of people interested in archaeology. And because of that, they have volunteered to excavate. They have donated time and money. So that's why I call him the patron saint. The word archaeology itself comes from two Greek words. The first part, the archae part, archaeos part, is ancient, and logos, or the word or study of what is ancient, or the study of antiquities, we might say. For example, I have a degree in Near Eastern antiquities, which is basically Near Eastern archaeology. Well, there are several definitions, and as you watch some of the videos for your assignments, you'll see some of these different ideas. But a scientific study of the remains of the past, or remains of human activity. The idea here is that you're going to look at things scientifically. You're going to look at what humans have done, what they've left behind. One person's called it the study of durable rubbish, which is, I think, a good one, because mainly what you're going to see, what you're going to be able to excavate and discover, is what people have left behind. And of course, only the durable part we're going to find, especially after hundreds or thousands of years. Here's another one: systematic recovery, analysis, and interpretation of the surviving evidence of human activity. Well, that's a good one too. So you might find a variety of definitions. The idea here is connected to human activity, human culture, human remains, what people have left behind, what is durable that we can find. Now, some people have called, at least in previous times, archaeology the handmaiden of history. They don't like to use that terminology anymore, but the idea here is that archaeology and history go hand in hand, and that's certainly the case. There is prehistoric archaeology, but what we're really interested in this course is archaeology that relates to the historic periods, especially in the Near East, and of course there we have lots of records. The written records and the archaeological materials then go hand in hand, and what archaeology does for us as far as history goes is it broadens our study. It lets us study things for which there is no written record, but we do have evidence, physical evidence, remains, and so forth, that have been left behind. But certainly archaeology is not an exact science. It's not a pure science or a natural science. Pure science you'd be able to repeat. For example, a chemical experiment. I can mix together chemicals in Kentucky and record how I do it and do the experiment. I could repeat it again there, or really anywhere else. So you can do it over and over again. Archaeology you cannot. When you excavate, you only get one chance to excavate that particular square, and it's only the information that you record that is left, and then of course maybe a small amount of artifacts or maybe architectural remains. But you can't go back and do it again. So how do we carry out archaeology? Well, many people ask, how do you know where to dig? Locating a site. You know, in the Near East, we can look for a lot of signs as where human activity is. There's quite a bit available. There are large tells or mounds where there's been long time activity and human remains, walls, and so forth. You can also do surface surveys to find pottery just on the ground in the Middle East. It's just laying on the ground. The density of that and what kind it is will give you a good indication as to where people had activity. And the other way you might do it is connected with the name. What do the local people call the area? That might give you evidence as to connecting it to the site. Place names. There might be textual evidence, say in the Bible or some other text that gives you geographic idea. Is it near a river? Is it near a mountain? So forth. The surface survey, of course, is what is often used today because it's non-intrusive. As the name implies, you just survey the surface of the ground. So typically you would mark off a square, maybe a very large square, maybe 10 by 10 meters, maybe bigger, or maybe a rectangle, and then you would walk through that in a measured period of time, maybe 2 people for a half an hour in that large square, picking up whatever they find that's an artifact on the ground, pottery, metal, bones, so forth. That would be 1 man-hour per unit of square. And then you would move across the area that way, looking for surface finds. You take that back and look at the pottery. You get an idea. We found so many Roman pieces, found so many Iron Age, and so forth. So you determine what's on the surface will give you an indication of what's under the ground. Surveying a site is another thing that we do in archaeology. Basically, that means laying out a grid, mapping out the site. One site I worked in Jordan, we mapped the entire site. It was a fortress, Iron Age fortress. So the whole thing was laid out much like a battleship grid, and therefore every square was, or potential square, was labeled with a letter and a number. So A through, I think we went up to about H or I or J, and then numbering, say 1 through 20 or 30. So if you go to H12, so forth, that would have a grid on the map. So that's gridding the site. And then, of course, excavation of the site. You see a picture up here. Some people are excavating. This is where you open up squares, usually, is what we use in the Near East. Sometimes you might use a rectangle or a trench. And you begin to peel back the soil that's there, layer by layer. Stratigraphy is very important. And you do it in a systematic way. That's the reason why you do it in, say, a square, maybe a rectangle, and you go down slowly, carefully, removing. You don't just go out and dig big holes anywhere. It's a very systematic way, and you record everything that you're doing, usually with photographs, drawings, written records, as well as the artifacts. Here is an aerial photograph taken by the British, probably in the late 40s or early 50s in Jordan, a site where I worked for many years called Abila of the Decapolis. Aerial photos like this can also give you good indication as to where things are located. If you look in the center of the screen, you see a lot of angular lines, and you see the tell right there in the center. That's a tell. You can see it has straight lines that are there. Straight lines really don't occur in nature. Those are man-made. And so those are wall lines that has built up the tell. You can also see a road going through the center. That's an ancient road, at least Roman, perhaps earlier. There are many features that are on this. So an aerial photograph like this, you say, well, where are you going to dig? And you look at the aerial photo, it gives you a lot of depictions of where buildings, wall lines, and things are to help you determine where you might dig. So that's another thing. Aerial photos, geographic information system, which is where you take photos like this, you put them in a computer and enhance them. Many people say, what do you find in excavation? You find what is often called occupational debris. Basically, that just means the stuff that people have left behind. They dropped a bowl, a cook pot, it broke, they leave it on the ground. They eat something, they throw the bone down, the bone doesn't all decay, you find the remains of the bone, you find the remains of the pottery. Pottery is really a man-made stone. They take clay and form it and then fire it, and it transforms it into a stone-like substance, ceramic, which is very durable. It's very difficult actually to get rid of it. You'd have to pulverize it. I guess you could do that. But most of the time it's just broken into pieces. So we find occupational debris like you see in the hands here, just pottery and bones, maybe stone, work stones, maybe a coin, maybe metal. Human remains. I've excavated lots of tombs where we find the bones of people, objects of art. Pottery, of course. Pottery is the number one thing in the Near East that we find. You find a lot of pottery. Pottery is everywhere. And of course, it gives you then a good indication and a cheap indication of the occupation. Since we can date the pottery, it also gives us chronological study. You'll find buildings or the remains of buildings, foundation stones, wall lines, gates. Last summer I excavated an olive press that was built into bedrock. Still there, been there for more than 2,000 years. Inscriptions, sometimes inscriptions carved into stone, sometimes inscriptions on coins. But coins are a lot more rare than you might think of finding them in ancient sites. Occasionally, you might even find written documents. Of course, this is very rare. Could be tablets, could be on papyrus, could be an inscription. I've found very few of those in my years, and just fragments, on the tell, piece of stone with so few words inscribed on it. In a water tunnel at Abila, we found an inscription written on plaster with paint that was fragmentary, but you don't find a lot of written documents. Tools and weapons, things like knives, hammers, projectile points, like what we might call arrowheads, out of metal. We found some of those. You find some out of stone. So that's the kind of things that you might find. Botanical remains is something you may not think of. When people build a fire, say they're going to cook their dinner, they build a fire and they put in, let's say, some grain, some barley or wheat. They're boiling it. Maybe they put some meat in there, make a kind of a stew, something like that. As they're cooking it, maybe it boils over, the grains, or some spills out. It gets into the fire. The fire then carbonizes the grain, and that's going to last for a very long time. Archaeologists can find that. We often look then in fire pits, in places where people have been cooking. We take samples of that. We look for the remains of botanical remains and bones, and we can determine what people were eating. Cult objects, figurines, statues, idols. things like that. We can find that as well. Animal bones, sheep and goat bones. You see what the people are eating. You can tell from the bones um, how old the animal was, and that's going to tell you how they are using the animal. For example, if you were raising sheep to eat, or a goat, let's say, uh, they reach their sort of maximum size in 18 months to about 2 years. That means that if you keep the sheep around longer than 2 years, you're feeding them, you're taking care of them, and if you're mainly raising them to eat them, you're putting more energy into them than you're going to get out of them. So typically, if people are raising, say, sheep to eat, they'll be 18 months to about 2 years old. And most of the bones you find that people have butchered them and eat them. If they're keeping them for the wool, then they might keep them a long time. Usually production of wool maybe goes 6-7 years till the wool begins to degrade. At any rate, then you'll find that maybe after the wool's no good, they go ahead and eat the sheep after that. So just the age of the bones and the way that they are cut up and butchered can tell you a lot about what people are doing with them and why they have them. And botanical remains can tell you if people are domesticated wheat and barley. Are they eating domesticated things? Are they eating wild plants? And also by what has been domesticated and can grow lets us know sort of what the weather pattern was, how much rain it would take for that to grow. A lot of things that you can determine from that. Fortifications, wall lines, gates. Also, outside of a wall they would put what's called a glacis, which is a sort of a ramped area covered with stones, basically to make it hard for you to underdig the wall. Now, how do we date the finds? Well, there's two kinds of dates, I guess, or dating system. There's an absolute date. This is what we do not find, absolute date. That means a precise year. For example, on the corner of a building, it says the building was built in 1985, so it has 1985 right on the corner of the building. That's a good indication the building was built in 1985, or at least part of the building was. We just don't find that kind of thing, so we don't have precise dates. That's very rare. Sometimes in an inscription, you'll find an inscription, like in that water tunnel, to give a precise date as to when that inscription was written. But that's pretty rare. That means it's relative dating. You know what relative dating is? That's when you take your cousin to the prom. But other than that, it means that we don't have the exact date. But we can say something is older than something else, something is newer than something else. One thing is relative or related to what else that you find. So that means the layer that's on top is newer than the layer that's down below. Radiocarbon dating is another chemical means where you can try to get a date and is fairly precise up to usually in the historic periods it can be used, but it has to be used in material that was once living, has carbon in it, and that is quite limiting, and it's also very expensive, and you still only get a range of dates. You don't get an absolute kind of dating. Stratigraphy is the layers. Often I say tell, or when we're digging, it's sort of like a layer cake. If you have a layer cake that has, let's say, 4 or 5 layers with icing, you know that the bottom layer was put down first, and then the icing, and then the next layer, and then the icing, and so forth. And so you can get an idea of how it was laid down. Same way with a tell, with a site. The stuff that's on top most likely is newer than what's down below. And so we use the stratigraphy to help us figure that out. Along with the ceramic typology, and that's the pottery, the shape and the style and the form of the pottery will help us date it, because it's been compared with pottery from across different sites. Well, that's our discussion for today, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll continue on from there. All right, take care.